The Venetian Heir Part 1. Chapter 1 Perfume and Debt. The rain fell in thin, slanting sheets over Paris, blurring the golden glow of the street lamps into shimmering halos. Inside Parfumerie Martin, the air was thick with the scent of lavender, bergamot, and desperation. Isabella Martin stood behind the counter, clutching a stack of unpaid invoices like they might suddenly decide to vanish on their own. The shop was her mother's legacy, a jewel box of crystal bottles and velvet-lined shelves, but lately, it felt more like a sinking ship. The rent was 3 months overdue, 2 suppliers had cut her off, and the once steady stream of customers had slowed to a trickle. She was mid-sigh when the door chimed. The man who entered did not belong to the grey Paris afternoon. He moved like someone who had never been in a hurry in his life, tall, broad-shouldered, his long coat a deep, ink-black wool, the kind you didn't find in department stores. And his eyes, a startling steel blue, swept the shop with a single, assessing glance before landing on her. Isabella Martin. His voice was smooth, accented, and carried the faint authority of someone accustomed to getting exactly what he wanted. Yes, she managed, though her fingers tightened around the invoices. Customers didn't usually say her name like that, as though it were already a part of their story. He stepped forward, removing his gloves with deliberate precision. "My name is Luca de Rossi. I've come from Venice. We need to speak, privately." Isabella's pulse skipped. "If you're here to sell me something, I'm afraid." "I'm here," he interrupted gently, "to buy something." His gaze swept over the delicate shelves before settling on her again. "Not perfume. Not this shop. You." For a moment, she thought she had misheard him. The rain outside seemed to hush, the ticking of the antique wall clock suddenly loud. "I beg your pardon." He smiled faintly, but there was no humor in it. "Your hand in marriage. It is a matter of family honor, and urgency." Isabella stared, certain this was some elaborate joke. But his face remained unreadable, his presence so solid she almost believed the absurdity. Somewhere deep in her memory, something shifted, an old conversation, her mother's voice speaking of a pact, a promise, but that had been bedtime story nonsense. Hadn't it? Before she could ask, Luca stepped closer, his voice dropping to a low, magnetic tone. "We have very little time, Signorina Martin. And whether you realize it or not, your life is about to change forever." Outside, the rain hammered harder against the windows, as though Paris itself was holding its breath. Chapter 2 The Proposal of a Lifetime. Isabella's laugh was sharp, more a reflex than amusement. "I'm sorry, did you just say marriage?" Luca de Rossi didn't blink. He simply removed his coat, draping it over the nearest chair as though he owned not only the seat but the air around it. His movements were precise, deliberate, the way one might handle an object of great value. "Yes," he replied, his voice rich with the faint cadence of Venice. "And I am not in the habit of repeating myself, Signorina Martin." The invoices in Isabella's hands slipped, fanning out across the counter like surrendering cards. She searched his face for some hint of a smirk, a glint of irony, anything to suggest he wasn't entirely serious. But his steel blue eyes were unwavering. "You don't know me," she said, shaking her head, "and I certainly don't know you. And you expect me to, what? Marry you?" He stepped closer, his scent, crisp citrus layered over something darker, like smoked cedar, filling the air between them. "This is not a question of romance," he said, though something in his gaze hinted otherwise. "It is a matter of family obligation. One your late mother understood." Isabella froze. My mother. Yes, he said simply. Decades ago, my family helped yours in a delicate matter. In return, she agreed that the next de Rossier would marry her daughter. That daughter is you. She stared at him, heart thudding. That's absurd. If such an agreement existed, I would know about it. He gave a faint shrug. Your mother chose not to burden you with it. But the time has come. I am that heir. You are that bride. The room seemed suddenly smaller. The perfume bottles lining the shelves caught the pale winter light, throwing rainbow shards onto the walls. Isabella wanted to laugh again, to send him on his way, but something in his manner, the calm certainty, the quiet authority, kept her still. And if I refuse? She asked at last. Luca's jaw tightened, just enough for her to notice. Then the pact is broken. The consequences will be regrettable. For both our families. Her mouth went dry. You make it sound like a threat. It is a fact, he replied evenly. But I am here to offer a solution that benefits us both. I will purchase your perfumery, erase your debts, and ensure your security, for life. All I require is your agreement, and your hand. It was such an outrageous offer, it almost made sense. Her shop was drowning, her savings non-existent. And yet, marriage. To a stranger. She turned to the rain-slicked window, watching the blurred headlights glide past en route de l'Odeon. When she faced him again, Luca was watching her with that infuriating stillness, as if he already knew what she would decide. You have until tomorrow to give me your answer, he said, retrieving his coat. I will return at noon. And with that, he left, the bell above the door chiming softly in his wake, as though mocking her for being left alone with the impossible. Chapter 3: The Pact Revealed. Isabella barely slept. All night, her mind replayed Luca de Rossi's words, his unshakable calm, his impossible offer. By morning, the shop felt different, like the air itself was aware of the clock ticking toward noon. She tried to distract herself by polishing glass bottles, arranging displays, and pretending her life wasn't a storm waiting to break. But every movement was mechanical, her thoughts circling back to the same question: why would my mother agree to such a thing? When the shop door finally opened, it wasn't Luca but a small, hunched man in a rain-spotted trench coat. He carried a leather satchel worn to softness, its buckles gleaming. Signorina Martin. His French was tinged with a lilting Italian accent. I am Alberto Costa. I worked for your mother many years ago. I believe you may need to hear a story. She hesitated, but something in his eyes, a mixture of loyalty and urgency, convinced her to lock the shop door and lead him to the small back office. Alberto set his satchel on the desk and carefully pulled out a bundle of yellowed letters, tied with a faded blue ribbon. Your mother, Claire, was a brilliant perfumer, yes. But there was a time when she nearly lost everything. A business rival accused her of theft, and there were debts. Debts she could not repay. Isabella's breath caught. Her mother had never spoken of debts. Go on. It was Luca's grandfather, Signor Enrico de Rossi, who intervened, Alberto said, his voice heavy with memory. He paid off her creditors, silenced the rival, and restored her reputation. In return, Claire promised that when the time came, her daughter would marry the de Rossier. She saw it as cementing an alliance between two families. Isabella stared at the letters. The handwriting was unmistakably her mother's, elegant, looping, but the words were sharp with urgency, desperation, and gratitude. She truly agreed to this. Isabella whispered. Yes. She believed it would protect you, always. Alberto's gaze softened. She admired the de Rossis, trusted them. She told me once that they keep their promises like they keep their treasures, locked away, but never forgotten. A strange, conflicted ache stirred in Isabella's chest. She wanted to feel angry, betrayed, but there was also the faintest flicker of curiosity. What kind of family kept a decades-old pact like this alive? And what would it mean to step into their world? When Alberto left, she lingered over the last letter in the bundle, dated just a month before her mother's death. In it, her mother had written, "If Luca comes for you one day, listen before you decide. The de Rossis are not what they seem." The bell above the shop door chimed. Isabella turned, and there he was, Luca de Rossi, perfectly on time. "Have you considered my offer?" he asked. Her fingers tightened around the letter. "I have questions first." The faintest curve touched his lips. "Then I have answers." Chapter 4 Clock is ticking. The small back office of Parfumerie Martin seemed to shrink under Luca de Rossi's presence. He did not sit, instead, he leaned one hand lightly on the desk, as though every surface in the room were his by default. "I will be direct, Signorina Martin," he began. "The pact your mother made has an expiration date. If we are not wed by the end of the month, the agreement is void." Isabella crossed her arms, trying to steady her voice. "And why should that matter? Surely you could walk away from this arrangement." Luca's eyes sharpened. "It is not so simple. If the pact is broken, my grandmother's estate, the oldest part of the de Rossi holdings, will be seized by distant relatives. And they are not trustworthy people." A flicker of genuine concern passed over his face, and for a moment Isabella glimpsed something beneath the polished exterior, loyalty, maybe even fear. "I understand this sounds inconvenient," he went on, "but the estate is more than a property. It holds archives, art, documents, things your mother trusted would be preserved. She knew that in de Rossi hands, they would be safe." "And you want me to believe," Isabella said slowly, "that marrying me is the only way to protect all this?" "Yes," Luca replied, without hesitation. "The marriage finalizes the alliance. Without it, my family's claim weakens. And once the claim is gone, the vultures will come." She turned away, looking at the rain streaking down the narrow windowpane. The words "end of the month" echoed in her mind like the toll of a church bell. "How long do I have to decide?" she asked, her voice quieter than she intended. He reached into his coat, producing a small, silver pocket watch. Its cover was engraved with the de Rossi crest, a lion clutching a rose. With a soft click, he opened it, revealing not just the time but a folded slip of parchment inside. "You have 28 days," he said, tucking the watch away again. "Every day you hesitate is a day we lose in preparing for the wedding, and in protecting what matters." Her practical mind rebelled. Marriage was a lifetime, not a transaction. But the memory of her mother's final letter burned in her thoughts. "Listen before you decide." Luca took a step closer. His voice was low, not pleading, but certain. "I am offering you security, Isabella. For your shop. For your future. And for the legacy your mother fought to preserve." She met his gaze, steady despite the churn inside her. "And if I refuse?" A shadow crossed his features, the first crack in his composure. "Then you will lose your shop within the month, and I will lose my home." The bell at the front of the shop rang as a customer entered, breaking the taut silence. Luca glanced toward the sound, then back to her. "Think carefully," he said, heading for the door. the clock is already ticking. When he left, Isabella stood in the quiet, the scent of sandalwood lingering in the air, and for the first time, she felt like her life was no longer hers to control. Chapter 5 To Venice. The decision came faster than Isabella expected. It was 3 days after Luca's visit, the shop silent but for the rain tapping on the awning. She'd spent 2 nights staring at the ceiling, imagining her mother's voice, imagining losing the perfumery, imagining Luca's steady gaze that seemed to see through every protest she could muster. When he returned, she didn't speak right away. Instead, she handed him a sealed envelope containing her answer, 1 word. Yes. Luca didn't smile, not exactly, but there was a subtle shift, a softening at the edges. Then there is no time to lose, he said. Pack a bag. We leave within the hour. The hour. Isabella blinked. I can't, I have to close the shop, cancel orders, speak to. I have arranged it, he interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. Your affairs will be handled in Paris. In Venice, we begin preparations. Before she could protest further, a black car appeared at the curb outside. The driver stepped out, holding an umbrella against the rain as though she were already some rare and valuable thing to be protected. The journey began in a blur. The car glided through the grey Paris streets toward a private airfield, where a sleek jet waited, its polished silver reflecting the low clouds. Inside, soft leather seats and crystal glasses of sparkling water awaited her. Isabella sat opposite Luca, trying to ignore the way he seemed completely at ease, even at 30,000 feet. He spoke occasionally, pointing out the Alps as they appeared below, snow-capped and shimmering in the pale light. But mostly, he let her watch in silence, as though he knew she needed space to take in what she had agreed to. When they descended, it was into a warmer world, Venice in late afternoon, the air tinged with salt and wood smoke. The private boat waiting for them was long and sleek, its hull a deep, glossy mahogany. The moment she stepped aboard, the city unfurled before her, the pink and cream facades of centuries-old palazzi, the glint of gold mosaic on a church dome, the sound of water slapping gently against the stone quays. Masked attendants, yes, masked, awaited them at the landing by the De Rossi Palazzo. Their half-masks were elaborate, feathered and gilded, as if welcoming her to a perpetual carnival. This, Luca said as they mounted the marble steps, is your home now. The double doors swung open to reveal a grand hall of black and white marble, a chandelier the size of a small carriage glittering overhead. The scent of polished wood and faint incense drifted from somewhere deeper inside. A small crowd of servants and well-dressed relatives gathered to greet them, their eyes bright with curiosity, and, in some cases, a little too sharp with judgment. Somewhere in that shifting crowd, Isabella felt a chill, as though one pair of eyes watched her more intently than the rest. She turned slightly, catching a flash of a woman in deep crimson silk, her lips curved in an amused, knowing smile. But before she could ask who the woman was, Luca took her hand and guided her forward, his voice calm and steady. Welcome to Venice, Isabella. Chapter 6 Whispers in the Shadows. The evening of her arrival, Isabella was swept into a reception she hadn't been warned about. The great hall of the De Rossi Palazzo glittered with candlelight and opulence. Every marble column was wound with garlands of white roses, golden candelabras stood on tables laden with crystal dishes of sugared almonds and jewel-toned fruits. A string quartet played from the balcony above, their soft music curling through the air like perfume. Luca moved easily among the guests, dignitaries, business partners, and members of Venice's oldest families, greeting each with the same cool authority. Isabella stayed close at first, unsure who was friend or foe, until he was drawn into a conversation with a severe-looking man in a silver mask. Left momentarily alone, she wandered toward a table lined with delicate champagne flutes. The sparkle of the crystal caught her eye, but so did a sudden movement at her elbow. A man she didn't recognize, dressed in an unremarkable black suit, leaned slightly toward her. His face was partially hidden by the brim of his hat, and when he spoke, his voice was low, urgent, and meant only for her. "He doesn't want you," the stranger murmured. Isabella blinked. "Excuse me. He wants the heirloom." The words were quick, clipped. "Be careful, Signorina Martin. You are here for one reason, and it isn't love." Before she could ask anything, he pressed something into her hand, a folded piece of cream paper, and vanished into the crowd as if he had never been there at all. Her heart hammered as she slipped the note into her small beaded clutch, careful not to draw attention. The champagne suddenly felt far too sweet on her tongue. Across the room, Luca caught her eye. His gaze lingered, searching her face as if reading her thoughts, before he offered the faintest nod and turned back to his conversation. Isabella's fingers itched to read the note immediately, but the weight of so many eyes kept her in place. The guests' glances weren't openly hostile, but there was a subtle shift whenever she passed. Conversations paused a fraction too long, smiles that didn't quite reach the eyes. Finally, she excused herself under the pretense of admiring the view from the grand balcony. The night air was cool, smelling faintly of the lagoon. She unfolded the note under the shadow of a marble arch. The handwriting was bold, urgent. "The sapphire belongs to you. Not to him. Trust no one." A shiver ran down her spine. She had never heard of a sapphire in her family's possession, yet the stranger had spoken as though it was common knowledge. Behind her, the sound of footsteps drew closer. She crumpled the note into her clutch and turned, expecting to see Luca. Instead, it was the woman in crimson silk, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "You're quite the mystery, Isabella," she said softly, almost like a purr. "I do hope you enjoy Venice. It can be dangerous for newcomers." Before Isabella could respond, the woman swept back into the glow of the hall, leaving her with nothing but the music, the night air, and a creeping sense that she had just stepped into a game she didn't understand. Chapter 7: Glass and Glamour. The next morning, the palazzo was filled with movement, the quiet, efficient kind that made Isabella feel as though invisible hands were orchestrating her day before she had even opened her eyes. A maid arrived with a breakfast tray of coffee, fresh figs, and warm pastries. Moments later, another servant brought a cream-colored envelope sealed with gold wax. Inside was a simple handwritten note in Luca's precise, slanted script. "We leave at 10. Wear something warm. L." When she descended the sweeping staircase, Luca was waiting in the entrance hall, a charcoal coat draped elegantly over his arm. Without a word, he offered his hand to help her down the final step, a gesture so old-fashioned and deliberate that she felt a flicker of heat in her cheeks. They boarded a private boat that cut smoothly through the mist-veiled canals. The water lapped gently at the hull, and the air was cool and briny. In the distance, a cluster of low islands appeared, their terracotta rooftops glowing faintly in the pale winter sun. "Murano," Luca said. "The heart of Venetian glassmaking. I thought you should see it." It was impossible not to be captivated. The island's narrow lanes were lined with shops glittering like treasure chests, windows filled with glass chandeliers that shimmered like frozen rain, delicate goblets tinted with emerald and ruby, and sculptures so intricate they seemed spun from light itself. Luca led her to a workshop tucked at the end of a quiet canal. Inside, the air was warm and dry, the faint scent of molten sand hanging in the air. She watched, transfixed, as a master glassblower pulled a glowing blob from the furnace and coaxed it into the shape of a swan with long, fluid strokes of his rod. "It's like breathing life into fire," Isabella whispered. Luca glanced at her, and for a moment, the steel in his gaze softened. "Glass is fragile, yes, but it's also unyielding. It can survive for centuries if cared for properly." She wondered if he was speaking only of glass. He guided her deeper into the workshop, where finished pieces gleamed under soft light, vases with swirling gold threads, bowls that caught the light like captured sunsets. But Isabella noticed something else. On a high shelf, partly hidden behind a cobalt vase, sat a small, locked glass display box. Inside, she could just make out the corner of something wrapped in deep velvet, and for a fleeting moment, she thought she saw a glint of deep blue. The sapphire from the note. Before she could step closer, Luca's voice broke her focus. "This one," he said, lifting a slender glass perfume bottle, its stopper carved in the shape of a rose. "A gift for you. Murano glass is unlike anything else in the world." She took it carefully, the cool weight of it settling into her palm. The bottle was exquisite, but the image of that velvet-wrapped object lingered stubbornly in her mind. As they left the workshop, the winter sun glinted off the canal, dazzling her eyes. Luca's hand was warm against her elbow, guiding her toward the boat. "Venice," he said, as if it were both a promise and a warning, "is full of beauty and secrets." Isabella managed a smile, but her fingers tightened protectively around the perfume bottle. She was certain of one thing: she was only beginning to glimpse the truth. Chapter 8: A photograph from the past. That evening, the palazzo seemed unusually quiet. The day's visitors and distant relatives had left after an endless luncheon of seafood risotto, prosecco, and too many polite but probing questions. Even the canal outside was calm, the sound of water lapping against the stone walls slow and steady, like the heartbeat of the city itself. Luca was in a meeting somewhere deep in the West Wing, leaving Isabella to explore. She told herself she wasn't snooping, merely getting to know the home that was now, by agreement, partially hers. The palazzo was a labyrinth. Velvet drapes muffled her footsteps, and ornate gilt mirrors reflected her at strange angles as she passed. She drifted toward a set of double doors left ajar, their hinges sighing softly when she pushed them open. It was clearly a study, though study was a modest word for it. The high shelves were lined with leather-bound volumes whose spines bore titles in Italian, French, and Latin. A vast mahogany desk commanded the center of the room, its surface immaculate except for a neat stack of papers and a crystal pen holder. And there, to the right of the desk, stood a tall cabinet with glass doors. Inside were objects displayed as though each were a priceless relic: antique maps, porcelain figurines, and, on the top shelf, a photograph in a silver frame. Isabella stepped closer. Her breath caught. The woman in the photograph was her mother. Younger, her hair a richer shade of chestnut, her smile vibrant and proud. She was standing beside an older man with patrician features, perhaps Luca's grandfather, and in her hands, she cradled a small, rectangular velvet box the size of a jewelry case. The box was a deep, unmistakable blue. Her mind flashed back to the note from the masked stranger: "The sapphire belongs to you. Not to him." This had to be it. Whatever was in that velvet case, her mother had once held it, and now, somehow, it had ended up in the De Rossi world. As Isabella studied the photo, she noticed something else: the way her mother's fingers clutched the box. Not gently, not as if it were a mere gift, but tightly, protectively. And though she was smiling for the camera, there was the faintest shadow in her eyes, a look Isabella had never seen before. She reached for the frame, intending to examine it more closely, when a sound behind her made her freeze, the quiet but distinct click of a door closing. Turning sharply, she saw Luca standing in the doorway, one eyebrow raised. "You've found my study," he said evenly. I was just looking around," Isabella said, the words tumbling out too quickly. His gaze drifted from her to the photograph, and something unreadable flickered across his expression. He stepped forward, closing the distance between them, and took the frame gently from her hands. "This was taken many years ago," he said. "Our families were closer then." She wanted to ask about the box, about the sapphire, about why her mother had been holding it, but his tone made it clear the conversation was over. Instead, he placed the photograph back in its spot with deliberate care, and offered his arm. "Come," he said. "The lagoon is beautiful at night." As she allowed him to lead her out, Isabella cast one last glance over her shoulder at the silver frame. Her mother had been in this world once. And she had been holding a secret, one that, somehow, was now in Luca's keeping. That's the end of this part, but trust me, the next one is even more thrilling. We drop fresh episodes every day, so don't miss out. Like, subscribe, and stay tuned, you won't want to miss what's coming next.
Because every broken heart deserves a comeback. If this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe for more emotional romance every week. Hit like, drop a comment, and ring the bell so you never miss a moment of romance, redemption, and powerful love. And don't keep the drama to yourself, share this story with someone who lives for twists just like you. Thanks for listening, and remember, sometimes the best comeback is becoming unforgettable.